The purpose of today's lecture is to go over some of the activities done by the SEC and to discuss 4 documents that the SEC uses in order to provide its services. So, to get some background information on the SEC, you'll notice in the outline that I have a link to a web page called What We Do, and I'd ask that you click on that and read it. I'm going to just highlight a couple of comments that are found there. Okay, so now that we're at the page, notice near the top of the page that it first talks about the mission of the SEC. Their job is to protect investors. That means by providing investors with the information that they need. That also means creating enforcement actions against the people who violate different kinds of security laws. They also work to maintain efficient markets and to facilitate capital formation. So these two ideas work with the notion of providing stock exchanges, providing ways for people who want to sell securities or buy securities to engage in those types of activities. So how does the SEC do that? If you scroll down a little bit to the paragraph that begins with the laws and rules that govern the security industry, you'll see that it talks about certain basic facts that people should have prior to buying an investment and as long as they hold it. So the idea here is, right, that there needs to be a common pool of knowledge for all investors to judge for themselves whether or not to buy, sell, or hold a particular security. So the different types of documents that we look at will be examples of this. Finally, a little bit further down, it talks about, right, crucial to the SEC's effectiveness is the ability to engage in enforcement actions. And if we were to go back to the SEC's main website, on the top right-hand side of the page, you can see that there are 3 items listed under latest news. For example, if I click on this first one, it talks about an enforcement sweep against muni underwriters. Municipal underwriting deals with securities that are sold by government agencies, and the problem that they encountered dealt with the fact that the documents that they used to obtain these securities contained materially false statements or omissions about the bond user's compliance with continuing disclosure obligations, right? So the information that was supposed to be disclosed wasn't, and the SEC got involved with investigating it. So review this page and have some general knowledge about what the SEC does. The other thing we want to look at, and we'll go into 4 of these in greater detail, are the forms that the SEC issues or uses in order to engage in its activities. So when you click on the forms link, what I'd just like for you to notice is that the page is quite long. Right? It starts with numbers, continues with letters, continues with more letters. So there are a multitude of documents that organizations use to provide information to the SEC and the public. We're going to be interested in 4 of them, and if you want more information, all 4 of those are discussed here, right? For example, it talks about the 10K being the annual report, the 10Q being the quarterly report. The 4 documents we will look at are the 10K, the 10Q, the 8K, and the DEF 14A. Today's idea is to get familiar with the content. When we get to class, we'll go over the specifics of how to locate them. The first one we're going to look at is a 10K. There's a template that all businesses follow when preparing a 10K, and it includes specific items that have to be discussed. In the table, right, on the bottom of page 1 of the outline and continuing over to page 2, I have listed some of those areas. And to get an idea of what is in each one, we're going to go to the SEC website. I've already done a search for Whole Foods. We'll talk about how that happens in class. And if I search for their 10K, it appears here on the screen, and we can see that it was filed on November 13th, 2015. On the top of the page here, we can see that Whole Foods has a September 28th year end, so it took a little bit less than 2 months for Whole Foods to file its 10K. This is a deadline imposed by the SEC. They're not going to let companies take as much time as they want to provide information. So you can see that the documents out here are 2015 November, 2014 November, 2013 November, right? So there's a whole series of them. This 10K/A means that there was an amendment filed to a 10K, so they changed or updated some information. You click on the Documents tab, it takes you to the 10K kind of electronic table of contents, and when you click on the first link up here, the Form 10K, it takes you to the actual document. So what we want to do is just get an idea of what are some of the main components of the 10K. In the outline, right, the first area is called Business, and in Whole Foods 10K, we can see that there are 11 pages devoted to describing its business. To get there, right, we can just scroll down to the table of contents, click on item 1, and for example, it begins with some general information as to who they are. It talks about how their sales are divided between U.S. and a couple of stores, it looks like, outside the U.S. Talks about their purpose. Talks about how they try to differentiate themselves by quality and the types of products that they own. Scoop a little bit too far. Talks about the size of their company and their strategy for growing, which is primarily through opening new stores. And as you scroll down, you can see there's a variety of items that give background information about the store. So most 10Ks, right, begin with some description of the business. If I go to risk factors, this is a list of issues that could affect the operation of the company. So from the table of contents, we can see that there were 21 risk factors disclosed. It took them about 3 pages to describe that. And so some of them are kind of common to a lot of 10Ks. You know, if top management were to leave, we would have an issue. talks about impacts of economic conditions, availability of natural or organic products, volatility of stock price. So all of these things relate to the items that could affect the company. The third item that we see in the 10K deals with legal proceedings, and they don't have any disclosure here. They tell us to go to item 8 in the financial statements. That's further into the 10K document. I went ahead and looked at it. One thing that I saw was interesting was that they're involved in some lawsuits. They indicate that these lawsuits have been certified as class actions. That means that there could be a large number of people involved in the lawsuit. It doesn't give any further information since the lawsuit is pending. Back to the table of contents. There's a section called Selected Financial Data. And so this isn't the whole set of financial statements, but rather it's just some key information. One thing that's kind of interesting is this line here that talks about comparable store sales. And so this would be the change in sales for stores that have been open more than a year. And so one thing we noticed a few years ago, stores were able to increase sales year to year. In this case, we see sales for existing stores decreasing, further decreasing, and then further decreasing. So for Whole Foods to grow, it's getting tougher for them to increase sales in their existing stores. Growth is going to happen through new stores, since existing stores aren't growing nearly as fast as they were a few years ago. The next item that we talk about in the 10K is called the Management Discussion and Analysis, and that starts on page 19 and goes, according to the outline here, right to page 29. So this is 10 pages of information where management describes what is going on. So since this is an annual report, right, it gives some highlights of 2015. It gives them some highlights of what they expect to happen in 2016. And then you're going to see in here discussion of various components of their annual report. So there's a discussion about sales, discussion about gross profit, right? A discussion about selling, general, and administrative expenses. So many of the items that we see numbers of in the financial statements, in the management discussion and analysis, the company goes into further detail about those. And as I'm scrolling up and down, we can see that it is pretty large. Go down further, you can see that they have some discussion about accounting policies and how that affects the organization. So the MD&A is a section where a lot of information can be learned about the company. Finally, pages 30 to 54 are the balance sheet, and again, that's available through the table of contents, right? It's the financial statements and supplemental data, and from this little table of contents here, we can see that we have the accounting firm's report, the accounting firm's report on internal control, the balance sheets of the company, the statement of operations, the statement of comprehensive income, statement of shareholders' equity, statement of cash flows, right? All those types of financial statements you've learned about. And down here are the notes to financial statements, which are really quite lengthy. So while this is taking 24 pages, probably almost 20 pages are the notes, and these items are much shorter. In Part 3, there's several other sections relating to directors, executive compensation, related party transactions, and principal accounting fees and services. What happens here is you'll see that it says the information is incorporated herein by reference from the registrant's proxy statement. So the proxy statement is another document that is issued by the organization. If the information needed in the 10K can be found somewhere else, rather than having to publish it twice, they simply say go to the other document. And that's one of the documents that we'll happen to look at. So the 10K is a pretty important document. From the table of contents, you can see that there's several other areas that I haven't clicked on, and we'll just highlight a few, and you get the idea why this is important for disclosures to investors and potential investors. So that's the first video for this online part of the class. There's a second video to follow that will discuss the 8K, the 10Q, and the DEF 14A. So when you finish this, please go to the second video.